What we're seeing is an amalgam of power that's corporate, which of course the left-wingers complain about, that's government, which the right-wingers complain about, and then of media, which everybody complains about, and rightly so. And there's this idea that we're facing an apocalyptic emergency of such magnitude, whatever the emergency happens to be, that they should be conveniently ceded all the power. And one of the fronts upon which that battle is being fought is the ESG movement. And so do you want to walk through that for everyone, just to bring them up to date?
Absolutely. I mean, this has been something of my obsession over the last several years, and not just as a commentator, but as a doer and as an entrepreneur too. So the essence of the ESG movement is what it does is it uses the money of everyday citizens, Americans, but Canadians too, Australians and Western Europeans. It uses the money of everyday citizens to invest in companies and to vote their shares in ways that advance one-sided progressive agendas, environmental and social agendas that most of those people do not agree with, that most of those people did not know were actually being advanced with their own money, and which don't advance the financial best interests of most people whose money is actually used. So what does that mean? Think about yourself saving in a retirement account or a 401k account or a brokerage account. You think that the person who's managing that money is exclusively looking after your best financial interests. It turns out they're not. They're also looking after advancing these other environmental and social goals. Who are these institutions? They're asset management firms like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard or Invesco or countless others that have signed a pledge to say that they're going to align all of their underlying companies with the goals of the Paris Climate Accords, with net zero standards by 2050, with modern diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. And those 3 or 4 firms alone manage about $20 trillion, maybe even a little bit more. That's more than the US GDP right now in the hands of 3 to 4 financial institutions. But they're not using their money to do it. They're using the money of probably most listeners to this exchange right now, people watching this. Good chances that their money, their retirement accounts, their brokerage accounts are being used to tell companies like Apple to adopt racial equity audits that Apple's board initially did not want to adopt. To tell companies like Chevron to adopt Scope 3 emissions caps, which I can talk about what that means, but that Chevron did not want to adopt, and that most people watching this probably didn't want to force on Chevron either, but their money was used to do it anyway. That's what this ESG movement is all about. So how did we get here is actually a really important question. And a lot of this began, there were 2 big milestones seeing the supercharging of this ESG movement in our economy and in capital markets. The first one, which I think of as the Big Bang, that really set the whole thing, for all intents and purposes, into motion, was the 2008 financial crisis. In the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, Republicans, it's worth remembering this, Republicans in this country bailed out the big banks. The Bush administration and Hank Paulson, a CEO, an alumnus of Goldman Sachs, used public taxpayer funds to bail out Goldman Sachs while letting his competitors fail. This was crony capitalism all the way down. But right around that time, there was a fissure in the left-wing movement in this country where there was the birth of this new, let's call it the woke left. Barack Obama had just been elected the first black president of the United States. There was a lot of cultural currents in the US that said, well, wait a minute there. The real problem isn't quite economic injustice or poverty. It's really racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry. And by the way, climate change. This is post-Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. This actually presented the opportunity of a generation for Wall Street to say that, no, okay, guys, we'll make a deal with you. We will use our corporate power, use our money, really your money, to applaud diversity and inclusion, to put token minorities on corporate boards, to muse about this racially disparate impact of climate change from the mountaintops of Davos after flying there in a private jet. We'll do all of these things, but we don't do it for free. We expect the new left to look the other way when it comes to leaving our corporate power intact. And so they defanged Occupy Wall Street. Most people don't even remember what Occupy Wall Street is. It went by the wayside. And that's how the birth of this new, what I've sometimes called woke industrial or ESG industrial complex was born, where Wall Street said that, you know what, if you can't beat us, join us. And that's exactly what happened. So that was the first big event.
Do you think it was that conscious? Or do you think that that was the consequence of 1,000 micro decisions? I mean, were there,
The latter.
it's easy to see us, okay, the latter.
It was the latter. Yeah, I mean, this is not a smoke-filled room where there was some sort of meeting in the back of Goldman Sachs's boardroom on 85 Broad Street in Lower Manhattan. No, this isn't, and that's like the classical conspiracy theory. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just emergent reality, right? You watch it in slow motion. People need to understand when they think about what a conspiracy theory is that turns into reality. It's that if you just watch the camera reel in slow motion, it plays out in dangerously boring form. This is how the sausage gets made. So anyway, that was the first catalyst. And so what began as a challenge to the system, which is, as an intellectual or whatever, I always enjoy it if I agree it or not. It's at least interesting to watch. Something that began as a challenge to the system, stakeholder capitalism and ESG, slowly became ossified as the system. And there's a lot of forces behind that. The rise of passive index funds played a big role, and that's a discussion I can get into another time or maybe later in this discussion. But a big then catalyst came out there was two big catalysts that came out. One was in 2016 and one was in 2018. The thing that happened in 2016, of course, is that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. This created a seismic shockwave across the establishment class, both in capital markets as well as the linkage between business and politics. And what they said is, okay, wait a minute. This game may not be played the way it's supposed to be going forward. If political leaders like Donald Trump are going to break the system, then we, the business leaders, need to exercise our authority to step into the void instead. And then they were vindicated, or so they thought, when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords in 2018. Not a lot of people realize this. That was a big event. That is the event that threw kerosene on this ESG storm. This is what then caused CalPERS, the California Teachers and Pension Retirement System, and other big allocators, the people who give BlackRock and State Street your money. They started to say that, look, if political leaders are not going to step up to the occasion to address the existential challenges we face, like global climate change, then business leaders need to do it instead. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, started saying similar things, that we have to earn our social license to operate. And that's really what caused this ESG thing to spread like wildfire, was that event of pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. The problem with these, ESG or DEI three-letter acronyms is, what are they effectively saying? They're saying that, no, you can't have your own distinctive purpose. Everyone's purpose must be common to advance environmental, social, and governance goals, diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. That's a denial of diversity, right? It rejects
it's a lurking
institutional
tyranny.
Purpose. Exactly. It's a lurking tyranny versus, if you're really pro-diversity, you should have that fall out of the structure. What is your institutional purpose? If you run an institution, you have one question: why do we exist?